He thought he was testing love, but he never knew love was about to test him. They called him Daniel Obinna, the man with everything. His company's name was written in gold across the city skyline. His mansion stood like a palace among the clouds, his cars purred like lions in the night, and his smile could light up a room full of envy. But when the noise faded and the guests were gone, silence followed him like a shadow. People praised him for his success, but no one truly knew the man behind the wealth. And in that silence, Daniel began to ask himself a question that haunted his soul. If I had nothing, would anyone still love me? Money could buy him comfort, respect, even attention, but not peace. Each relationship he tried ended the same way, smiles that faded once the gifts stopped coming. One night, sitting by his balcony, he watched the city lights blink like distant stars. The wind carried the sounds of laughter, street vendors, children running, lovers walking hand in hand. He envied them. They looked happy with so little. Daniel whispered, almost to himself, maybe I need to know what love feels like without all this. The next morning, he called his driver, handed him the keys to his Range Rover, and said quietly, take a week off. I need some time alone. He dressed in simple clothes, a faded shirt, old jeans, and dusty sneakers. He left his watch, wallet, and credit cards behind. For the first time in years, Daniel walked through the city streets unnoticed. He stopped by a roadside cafe, a small wooden stall with a hand-painted sign, Amara's Kitchen. The aroma of jollof rice and fried plantain filled the air. A young woman stood behind the counter, serving customers with a bright, honest smile. Her laughter had a warmth that no diamond could buy. Daniel sat quietly in the corner, watching. When she came to him, he smiled shyly. Daniel, how much for a plate? Amara, 200 naira, but if you don't have it, you can still eat. Daniel, surprised you'd give food for free? Amara, hungry people don't need prices. They need kindness. That single sentence hit Daniel deeper than any love song ever could. He ate slowly, watching her serve others, the tired driver, the woman with 2 children, even a beggar who couldn't pay. Amara treated them all the same. When he finished, he reached for his pocket, pretending to count coins. Amara smiled, don't worry. You can pay tomorrow. Daniel left that stall that evening feeling something he hadn't felt in years, peace. He returned the next day. And the next. Each time, he learned more about Amara. She was 26, raised by a single mother, struggling to care for her younger siblings. Her dream was simple, to own a small restaurant one day. Daniel began helping her quietly, fixing the stove, sweeping the front, carrying water. He laughed freely again. For once, he felt seen for who he was, not for what he had. But even as love began to bloom, a seed of pride whispered inside him. If only she knew who you really are. He wanted to reveal the truth, that he wasn't a poor man but a billionaire searching for something real. Yet something stopped him. Maybe fear. Maybe guilt. One evening, as the sun sank and the city lights came alive, Amara looked at him curiously and asked, Daniel, do you ever dream of a better life? He smiled faintly and replied, sometimes, the better life is the simple one we ignore. She nodded, not knowing she was speaking to the man whose wealth could buy the entire street. That night, Daniel walked home through the quiet alleys, lost in thought. The city no longer felt like his kingdom. It felt like a mirror reflecting his emptiness. He looked up at the dark sky and whispered a proverb his father once told him. A man who tests others may one day be tested by the gods. He didn't know how true those words would soon become. Because while Daniel thought he was testing love, fate was already preparing to test him. The days rolled by like the slow rhythm of an old song. Each morning, Daniel returned to the same wooden stall by the roadside. It became his new world, a place of laughter, sweat, and the smell of smoky stew. Amara always greeted him with that same radiant smile. Sometimes she teased him for always ordering the same meal. This your appetite for rice and plantain. You must be running from jollof in your dreams, she would laugh. Daniel laughed too. He hadn't laughed like that in years. The more time he spent around her, the more he saw beauty beyond her face. Beauty in her patience, her strength, her heart. She worked from sunrise till late night, serving strangers, washing plates, never complaining. When he asked why she smiled so much despite her struggles, she replied, "Because complaining won't change anything. But gratitude can change how I see everything." Those words stayed with Daniel. He started helping her with little things, carrying water buckets, scrubbing tables, and fixing the broken stool. She didn't know he'd once hired men to build skyscrapers. At night, when the market emptied, they'd sit under a flickering streetlight, talking about life. Amara shared how she lost her father, how her mother fell sick, and how she'd promised herself never to beg from anyone. "Life may take my comfort," she said softly, "but it won't take my dignity." Daniel looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized that her worth was not in her clothes or her earnings, but in her courage. One evening, a little boy ran into the stall crying. His mother had collapsed nearby. Amara didn't hesitate. She dropped everything and rushed to help. Daniel followed. They took the woman to a small clinic and waited outside until she was stable. Daniel watched Amara speak gently to the nurse, pay the small fee from her day's earnings, and then return to her stall as if it was nothing. "You didn't even know her," Daniel said quietly. "I don't have to," she replied. "You don't need to know someone to show them kindness." That night, as the stars watched silently, Daniel's heart trembled. The woman he had chosen to test was already teaching him lessons he didn't know he needed. But outside that little world of peace, trouble was brewing. One afternoon, a black SUV stopped by the stall. Inside were Daniel's two business associates, men of power and pride. They had been searching for him, confused by his sudden disappearance from meetings and luxury events. They rolled down the window and saw him carrying trays and laughing with Amara. "Daniel?" one of them called in disbelief. "You're here washing plates? My friend, what are you doing?" Daniel froze, then forced a nervous smile. "Just helping someone." The men burst out laughing. "Helping? Is this your new office? My friend, come back to reality. A man like you doesn't belong here." Amara stood in the background, her smile fading slightly. Daniel felt the sting of shame rise in his chest. Pride, that silent poison, whispered again in his ear. "She will never see you as a man of worth if she finds out who you really are." When the SUV drove off, Amara asked quietly, "They spoke to you like they know you." "Just old friends," Daniel replied quickly, avoiding her eyes. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, torn between two worlds, the fake simplicity he had created and the truth he was hiding. He wanted to tell her everything. To say, "I am not who you think I am. I have money, power, and a mansion on the hill." But each time he tried, fear stopped him. What if she started treating him differently? What if he lost the purity of her love? And so, Daniel chose silence, a silence that would soon cost him dearly. Weeks passed. Their friendship deepened into something unspoken, love that didn't need confession to exist. But destiny, as always, was waiting. One day, Amara didn't open her stall. Daniel asked around and learned that her mother had collapsed again. Without thinking, he ran to her home, a small, old building on the edge of the market. He found Amara sitting outside, her eyes swollen from crying. "The doctor says she needs surgery," she said in a broken voice. "But I don't have the money." Daniel's heart tightened. He wanted to reach into his bank account and pay every bill, but that would expose everything. He sat beside her and said softly, "Don't worry. She will be fine. God doesn't forget kind people." Amara smiled faintly, tears glistening. "I just wish I had enough to save her myself." Daniel clenched his fists. He hated himself in that moment, for pretending, for hiding, for testing a heart that had only ever been pure. He left her house, walked through the dark streets, and whispered to the wind, "I wanted to know if love was real, but now, I'm the one living a lie." Above him, the moon hid behind the clouds, as if even heaven couldn't watch what was coming next. Because life was preparing to turn Daniel's test into a lesson. And the price of that lesson would be everything he once thought he owned. When a man digs a hole for another, he must remember that the earth has no favorite. Daniel's test, the one he thought he controlled, was about to become his own trap. The morning sun rose over the city with a quiet vengeance. The traffic roared, vendors shouted, and life moved as if nothing had changed. But deep inside Daniel's chest, something was breaking. He sat alone in his apartment, not his mansion, but a small, rented flat he used for his disguise. On the table lay 2 phones, one for his business life, the other for the man he was pretending to be. Both started ringing at once. He answered the first. It was his company's lawyer. "Sir, the investors have pulled out. The documents you signed are being questioned. There's a problem with the accounts." Daniel's heart sank. He had trusted one of his top managers with a major deal while he was away, testing love. That same man had betrayed him, moving millions into his own name. "Handle it immediately," Daniel ordered, his voice trembling. "We can't," the lawyer replied. "It's already in the papers." He turned on the TV. Headlines screamed across the screen. Obinna Group under investigation for fraud. In an instant, everything he had built began to crumble like dry sand. He spent the next few days running between offices, making calls, trying to save what remained. But the more he tried, the faster it slipped through his fingers. His accounts were frozen, properties seized for questioning, and his name dragged through the mud. By the 5th day, he stood on the balcony of his penthouse, staring at the skyline that once defined him. "All this, gone," he whispered. And then he remembered Amara, the only person who had never asked him for anything. The only person who saw him when he had nothing to give. He wanted to go to her, but pride held him back. How could he explain his disappearance, his lies, his double life? That evening, as he finally decided to call her, another message arrived. "Bank notice, final warning. Your account has been closed pending investigation." Daniel sank to his knees. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for wealth, not for power, but for peace. "Good. I tested love. But why do you test me like this?" No answer came, only the hum of the city below. Weeks passed. His name vanished from the business pages. His mansion was locked by authorities, cars towed away, servants gone. He sold his last valuables to survive and moved into the small neighborhood near Amara's stall. Life had turned full circle. He was now living the life he once faked. Every morning he sat by her stall, helping her wash plates, pretending nothing was wrong. But Amara noticed the sadness behind his smile. "You've been quiet lately," she said one evening. "Are you all right?" "Just tired," Daniel murmured. He watched her serve food, joke with customers, and laugh freely. How did she remain so joyful when life was so unkind? Amara looked at him and said, "Daniel, I've learned that pain is not the enemy. Pride is. It's pride that stops us from asking for help when we need it." Her words hit deep, as if fate was using her voice to speak to him. He smiled weakly, hiding the storm inside. One night, rain began to fall. The streets emptied, and Amara started closing her stall. Suddenly, Daniel spoke. "Amara, there's something I must tell you." She turned, curious. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I haven't been honest with you. I'm not who you think I am. I used to be a wealthy man. Daniel Obinna, the CEO you probably saw on TV." Amara froze. For a moment, the rain was the only sound. "You mean, all this time, you were pretending?" Daniel nodded, shame in his eyes. "I wanted to know if someone could love me without my money. I thought I was in control, but then everything collapsed. I lost everything, Amara, everything." Amara stared at him, her face unreadable. Then quietly she said, "So, you were testing me?" "Yes, but I didn't expect the test to turn on me." She sighed, wiping rain from her face. "Daniel, love is not an exam you can set and mark by yourself. It's something you live, not something you test." He looked down, guilt washing over him. "I'm sorry." "I know," she said softly. "But some truths leave scars that time alone can heal." She turned away, walking into the rain, leaving Daniel standing alone. That night, Daniel wandered the city streets, soaked and broken. He had lost his fortune, his pride, and now the woman who had loved him without even knowing who he truly was. He remembered an old saying his grandmother used to whisper, "When you play with truth, it plays back harder." He finally understood. The test he created to expose love had instead exposed him, stripped him of everything false until only the truth remained. The next morning, Daniel returned to Amara's stall. He didn't go as the man she once knew, or the man the city once praised. He went as a man ready to rebuild, not from wealth, but from humility. He asked for a plate of rice. She served him silently, their eyes meeting for a moment that said everything words could not. When he finished eating, he placed a single note on the table and said, "This is all I have for now. But I'll work to earn more, not for myself but for us." Amara looked at him, her heart torn between anger and pity. "Then start by being honest," she said softly. "That's worth more than gold." He nodded, a small tear escaping his eye. As he walked away, the morning sun broke through the clouds, faint but certain. Because somewhere deep in Daniel's heart, hope was still alive. He had lost everything, yet somehow he was beginning to find himself. They say, when the storm comes, even the strongest tree bends. Daniel had lost everything: his fortune, his pride, and almost the woman whose heart he'd tested. But from the ashes of loss, something new was beginning to grow. Weeks turned into months. The city that once spoke his name with awe had forgotten him. Yet, in the forgotten corners of that same city, Daniel was quietly rebuilding his life, not with money, but with humility. He worked at a small mechanic garage on the edge of the market, earning just enough to feed himself. His palms were rough, his back ached, but his heart was finally at peace. Every morning he saw Amara passing by on her way to the cafe. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she didn't. But every time, Daniel's chest filled with quiet gratitude, because she still looked at him even after knowing his truth. One afternoon, as the sun melted into the horizon, Daniel was wiping his hands when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "You still owe me for that plate of rice?" Amara teased, standing by the workshop door. Daniel turned, stunned but smiling. "You kept the bill that long?" "Of course. I told you could pay later, not never." They both laughed. For a moment, the weight of the past melted away. She handed him a food pack. "Eat," she said gently. "You can pay me when Destiny gets a promotion." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You're still the same Amara, giving even when you have little. And you," she smiled, "are finally learning how to receive." They sat on a wooden bench, sharing a quiet meal as the market lights flickered on. The world around them was loud, car horns, vendors shouting, but between them was silence. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of two people who understood each other without needing words. Later that week, Amara's mother came to the garage. Her face was stern. "So, you are the one who deceived my daughter," she said sharply. "The rich man who pretended to be poor." Daniel bowed his head. "Yes, Ma, I did wrong. But I've paid for it 100 times over." Her eyes softened for a brief moment before turning hard again. "She's young. She deserves better. Leave her be." Daniel nodded silently. He knew he couldn't argue with a mother's fear. That evening, when Amara came by, he didn't tell her about the visit. He simply smiled and said, "Promise me something. No matter what happens, keep your dreams alive." Amara frowned. "Why are you talking like this?" "Because life doesn't always give us what we want, but it always gives us what we need." She didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. A few weeks later, a man drove into the garage in a silver sedan. He was the owner of a logistics company, impressed by Daniel's honest work. "You fixed my car last time without overcharging me," the man said. "I like your integrity. I'm opening a new branch. I want you to manage it." Daniel was speechless. It wasn't the millions he once controlled, but it was a new beginning, a chance to build again the right way this time. When he told Amara, her eyes filled with pride. "You see," she said softly, "God never forgets those who fall and rise with humility." Daniel smiled. "Maybe this time he wants me to build something that lasts." "Then start with honesty," she replied. "Everything else will follow." That night, they sat by her cafe after closing hours. The air was warm, filled with the scent of fried plantain and fresh rain. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. Sometimes, he admitted. But I've learned that wealth without truth is poverty in disguise. Amara looked at him. Not the man who once owned skyscrapers, but the man who now owned his truth. You've changed, Daniel. You changed me, he said softly. The moonlight brushed their faces as silence fell again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of forgiveness, healing, and quiet hope. That night, as Daniel walked home, the city lights glimmered like new stars. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel lost. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for now, that was enough. Because sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't found in riches or revenge. It's found in the heart that chooses to stay. They say, when the gods finish testing a man, they give him peace greater than the storm. And for Daniel Obinna, peace finally came, not through riches, but through grace. Months had passed since Daniel began managing the small auto shop. Business was slow at first, but his honesty became his loudest advertisement. People trusted him, the driver, the teacher, the market woman with her small car. They called him Brother Daniel, the man who never cheated, the one who smiled through struggle. Amara's cafe grew too. Her little stall had become a warm haven for tired souls. Each morning, Daniel would stop by for breakfast, plantain, beans, and her familiar laughter. They never spoke of the past anymore. It didn't need words. It lived quietly between them, like an old scar that had healed. One evening, as the sun painted the city gold, a black SUV stopped in front of the garage. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, one of Daniel's former board members. "Mr. Obinna," he began respectfully, "we've been looking for you. The company is falling apart. The new CEO has been arrested for fraud. The shareholders want you back." Daniel froze. The world he'd walked away from was calling again. The power, the comfort, the name. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "I'm not the same man you used to know." "That's why we need you," the man replied. "Someone honest. Someone who's changed." The man left a business card and drove away. Daniel stood there for minutes, staring at the card. It wasn't temptation, it was closure. That night, Daniel went to Amara's cafe. She was cleaning up, the soft light flickering over her face. He placed the card on the counter. "They want me back," he said quietly. Amara paused. "Will you go?" He sighed deeply. "Before, I would have said yes without thinking. But now, I don't know." She walked closer. "Maybe the test isn't about where you go, Daniel. Maybe it's about who you are when you get there." Her words sank deep. He smiled faintly. "You always know how to make things clear." "No," she replied gently, "you just finally learned how to listen." He reached for her hand. "Come with me then. Let's build something honest, together." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, tears in her eyes. "Together," she whispered. Weeks later, Daniel walked into the company's glass building, not as the proud CEO he once was, but as a humble man returning to rebuild what he once broke. The staff whispered as he passed, shocked to see him in simple clothes, holding Amara's hand. At the meeting, he stood before the board and said, "I don't want to lead from the top anymore. I want to build from the ground up. I once tested love, but life tested me, and I failed until I learned that success without compassion is failure in disguise." The room was silent. Even the walls seemed to listen. Months later, Daniel launched a foundation with Amara, the Heart of Truth initiative, to help struggling youths and women start small businesses. The same people who once mocked Amara now respected her. And Daniel? He no longer needed applause, he found joy in purpose. They married quietly, surrounded by those who had walked with them through fire. No luxury, no paparazzi, just music, laughter, and the smell of home-cooked food. During the ceremony, Amara's mother whispered through tears, "You were right, my daughter. The poor man I feared gave you a richer life than gold ever could." Amara smiled and replied, "Because love tested by truth never fails." One evening years later, Daniel stood again on the same balcony where his journey began. The city lights twinkled like old friends. Amara joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret pretending to be poor?" she asked softly. He chuckled. "No. Because if I hadn't, I might never have met the richest woman I know, the one whose heart is worth more than my fortune. She smiled, eyes glistening. You finally passed the test. He looked at her and replied, No, my love. We did. When a man tests love with deceit, he risks losing both. But when he faces truth with humility, love becomes his reward. And so, the man who once pretended to be poor discovered that the truest riches were found not in his mansion, but in the heart that stayed. If you believe true love still exists, one built on truth, not wealth, like, comment, and share this story. And don't miss our next tale.